On the 8th of June,
we are going to vote in the general election
to decide who is going to be in power.
As a person with a learning disability,
it is important for me to vote because
it could affect my quality of life, such as
whether I can afford to go to college to learn new skills,
to have access to National Health Service as a good one,
being able to get places on public transport easily and safely,
so that day services can keep open,
and having a choice about the activities I take part in.
It will affect my benefits, how I pay for support and other costs.
To have your say, you must be registered to vote.
By the 22nd of May.
To register, go to.
For more information about voting, you can go to these websites.
And remember, have your say on the day.
Thank you. They're extremely proud because they've never had such a positive reaction through social media as they had to this particular campaign, and their friends and colleagues in a group of people with sensory impairments have made a follow-up video which has been well received as well, so thank you for just bearing with us. About just 2 years ago, it seems really odd to think it's only 2 years ago we were doing this, we were both working in Qualitative and working alongside colleagues in Hertfordshire at the time who had been trying to think about a really different way to understand what social work was for and who social work's here to serve. And we very heavily influenced by a lot of the thinking of Sir James Mumby, who's just retired, Lord Justice Mumby, who's just retiring from the family courts, who has written a lot about what's the point of making someone happy if it merely makes them miserable. And there's what's the point of making someone safe if it merely makes them miserable. And he's also written a lot about the local authority as a servant, not a master. And if you're in public service, that's a really important thing that we've been trying to understand a little bit. And when it came up to the general election, when you work for local government, we're both politically restricted officers in a local government context, it becomes really important for us to advocate for democracy and to try to understand how we can make a contribution to that. And as a social work value set for us, the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities is an important touchstone that we're only just beginning to recognise we need to know. Don't know enough yet by a really long way, but we're starting to think there's much more that we need to understand about what happened when the Convention was signed and the positive obligations it brought into the UK. So Article 29, the right to participate in political and public life, became really important. If you've heard Gavin speak as the first Mayor of Selby, you'll know how powerful an agent of change somebody engaging actively within political life can be. Representation of the People's Act, 1983 and 2000, is the basis in UK law on the right to register and participate. And for us in social work practice, Section 73 of the Electoral Administration Act 2006 abolished mental incapacity as being a legitimate reason to prevent a person being able to register to vote or cast a vote. I'm not social work qualified. I am a qualified BIA. I haven't qualified with the BIA qualification. I can't practice because I'm not social work registered. Rob is a best interest assessor, thank you, which I did through Manchester Uni. And Rob is qualified social worker and a BIA and a practicing BIA. I'm a signatory to the Deprivation of Liberty authorisations. And I don't think you can sign them if you don't know what the S stands for in Deprivation of Liberty Safeguard. You should understand it's about safeguards, not about deprivation. So for us, this is a kind of really important touchstone. So back in 2005, Rob, do you want to just explain a little bit about what we did with the social workers?
Yeah, so we worked really closely with our colleagues in Hertfordshire, so we kind of buddied up with them, and we started a programme of work which was about, which was specifically for adult social workers. and it was about trying to re-engage adult social workers with the profession and the reasons why they'd come into adult social work in the first place. So we were working with a lot of practitioners who'd qualified social workers in the 1980s and the 1990s. And the 1990, if you think back to the 1990 NHS and Community Care Act, came up with a very, very managerial approach to social work and how social work works with people with disabilities. So we began to kind of have conversations with social workers about kind of what you're here to do. Very clear that social workers wanted to kind of very much shake off that brokerage role that they'd been given. They're kind of beginning to understand concepts of kind of personalisation and really kind of beginning to get their head around the fact that they weren't the decision maker in law. The person's the decision maker, that they've just got a professional opinion. So really kind of wanted to throw off some of the kind of shackles that they'd kind of had. So we started talking to them about kind of a rights-based approach, which is really kind of where social work has got its heart, or should come from, really. One of the kind of really striking things early on when we talked about rights-based approaches and working to better support people who were struggling to maintain and achieve human rights was the gap between the people that were there to support and serve and democracy, access to democracy. So a lot of us as experienced social workers had worked in kind of residential care, had worked in hospitals, had worked in children's homes, and when we started to talk about kind of what was our experience of supporting people to the ballot box or to register to vote or to even enable a discussion to take place, because you had so much power in those residential, those children's homes, we thought that there was a huge gap there, and that's kind of really, it really engaged the social workers. This is kind of what really helps us kind of get back to what we were doing. We had kind of one or two things that we kind of learned as we went on. We learned early doors, quite rightly, as Elaine says, about this kind of arrogance that we have as professional workers. We learned quite rightly that this isn't our agenda as social workers. We're merely there to kind of assist people in terms of the human rights. So we got slapped down very early by the self-advocacy group, which was, you know, kind of quite right, really. Kind of who were we to kind of trample all over some of the work that they'd already started. Do you want to move on?
Yeah. So the first thing I want to talk about is Hertfordshire, which isn't in the book you've seen today. Hertfordshire were supported, both teams actually, were supported by the Parliamentary Ombudsman at the time of the last general election, who wanted to try and understand a little bit more about mobilising people with intellectual disabilities to engage in the vote process. And Hertfordshire spoke to over 1,000 people, 1,019 people with a learning disability in 2015. And we very clearly, in both local authorities, we targeted people living in supported living settings. When I talk about supported living, it's really difficult in practice anymore to talk about supported living, because for us there's supported living which has one particular definition around how it works, and then there's residential care homes in a nice street with nice curtains that are pretty much doing the same thing these days. So we made a decision in both authorities that we wanted to go back to a really old definition, which is the old group home, and is in practice, I think, what we're seeing on the ground at the moment. So we sort of brought in scope places where people lived with a learning disability in multiple occupation, with about 6 people living in the house and a team around them, regardless of what the label on the door said, because it felt like they were kind of doing the same thing, and we wanted to see what the experience was. And in Hertfordshire, what they found was they did a lot of work about, before the election, about mobilising people to understand their right to register. And they got about 84% of people from that group registered to participate. And then on the day of the election, what they found, they went back out the following week to find out, did people actually cast a vote? And they found about a quarter of everybody who was registered cast a vote. So they were a bit shocked about that, because just to give you a comparison to that, it's something like 7 out of 10 people participate in general elections. But it was kind of 2.5, if you want, for this particular group of people. This is the largest ever survey that we're aware of ever into voting intentions and behaviours during the general election. And we've done a little bit of work. This is where Professor Chris is very helpful because he has all kinds of tools that you send in an Excel spreadsheet and numbers come back out of, and then you have to ask him, what does that mean? So what Chris has done for us is help us a little bit. So we've tried to test out different things to try and see and understand if there's any sort of associations going on. And two things have come out really strongly from the stuff we gathered back in 2015. There was an association between the views of staff in those group home settings about people's mental capacity and the likelihood that they actually cast a vote on the day of election in that group of just over 1,000 people. There was also, and this was much stronger, there was a significant association about if people lived in a housing unit where they were aware of their voting rights, their rights under Article 29 UNCRPD, they were significantly more likely to participate and cast a vote on election day. Now, those two things are really challenging, aren't they? Because staff views as gatekeepers was something we heard about in Calderdale. So at the time when this was going on in Hertfordshire, we were contacted by Democratic, just a bloke. There's always a bloke somewhere. This bloke who works in Democratic Services, he'd been going out trying to get people to sign up. And what he'd found was the older people's homes, brilliant, come on in, it's part of your culture. The elected officials are going around. I kid you not, I ran a load of homes because we do a lot of ringing of homes. I've just done it in Bradford. And there's literally one electoral agent. You were following them round, and they were very helpfully going, he's a lovely man, they have a cup of tea together, he helps everybody fill the forms in there and then about voter registration for your postal votes. Learning disabilities units, not that culture, that's not what you do. Why would you want to do that? So we thought, oh, need to do something about that. So we kind of mirrored it, but in a really small way. So in Calderdale we did it much smaller. Partly because Calderdale's smaller, Hertfordshire's massive. I don't know if you've been, but it goes on forever. So for us, we looked at about 15 homes that we had. We had 35 in total, so that kind of gives you a bit of a feel for it. And about 92 people were involved. Now, our bit was even more shocking for us, really. We found less than a quarter were registered at all, and less than 1 in 10 actually cast a vote during the election. And we did something a little bit different to Hertfordshire. We rang before the election. We rang all the homes, didn't we? Because what we wanted to do is we wanted a conversation with them about, we've got loads of easy read guide stuff printed, we've got loads of stuff about rights, and we wanted to take it out and say, was it all right if we come to the home? Now, the first test for you always is who answers the phone, isn't it?
Yeah, and probably about 90% of the homes that we phoned up, the staff answered the phone. There didn't seem to be any kind of culture whereby the people that lived in the home would answer their own landline telephone. That was a kind of a staff-led thing. A lot of the providers, the initial responses, they thought we were balmy. They thought they absolutely couldn't get their heads around the fact that, firstly, that a local authority was. But they were worried when they heard the name of the council because they associate the council with a carrot and stick kind of contract compliance. I think they're in bother. They think that CQC have phoned us up. We're there to close the unit down. So they kind of wanted, so they were suspicious right from the outset. When we began to talk about the people that lived in the home and their right to democracy, the phone more or less went down in terms of how some people dealt with us.
This is those of you who are proper qualitative researchers, just bear with us while we show you what we did, all right? Because look, we were ringing on the phone, we were jotting notes, we stuck it in a thing. It's just what we do in practice. So I don't want you to test me on what methodology I was using because I can't justify it for you. But look what they said. And no, this one, I took this call. No, they can't. They've got a brain injury. Well, for starters, no, there are real brain injury experts in the room. I don't even want to begin to explain that to you, because that really wasn't the case at all. This bit about, well, if they've got capacity, right? No, that's not.
There was that bit there about those with capacity will be taken to vote on the day. Kind of took practitioners that have been around a long time right back to the hospitals in terms of high functioning and low. That awful language about high functioning and low functioning. That there was an understanding from the staff that a certain group of people within the unit might be taken to vote because they were at a particular level, but then there was another group within the units that actually there would be no conversation take place.
And then I also said they're mentally handicapped. Now, I remember, I think it was Professor Goodley who mentioned earlier about mentally handicapped. No, that's still live. That's homes now. That's just 2 years ago. And then my absolute favourite one, right? I put a little gap here just to make sure you could see it. That's my emphasis there. No, they can't vote. No, they'd vote through the look of. Right. I don't know about how any of your voting intentions are, and I'm politically restricted, so please don't tell me. But if anybody isn't planning to do that, basically, there's no words. There's no way of explaining that. But as I said, don't test me on the methodology. So we'll just kind of.
I remember in 1987, my grandma telling me that she won't vote for Neil Kinnock because he'd got ginger hair. So I talked about kind of how people look. Poor Neil Kinnock didn't get a vote.
So this is just us kind of pulling it together. Just to show potential impact when you don't expect it. Jill is aware, Community Care became aware of the York Policy Review because it was the election and we were trying to encourage self-advocates in Bradford to work with us differently to where we got it wrong in 2015. So I started tweeting some of it. And Rachel, who's a journalist who's done some stuff with this before, read the article and got back and asked if we'd do a summary. So we got that out about 2 weeks ago. And the bigger piece of work, the kind of having had the confidence with Jill literally sitting by me telling me what to type at one point in order to get something to her. Well, you did help a lot. To try and has given more confidence to try and get the piece we've got together for TISAD. And we have we've used some of this, and Rob and I have both been working with the Department of Health about in the Vision for Social Work, there's an idea about social workers being named and piloting that in the world of learning disabilities first, which we weren't sure about, so we met with 20 self-advocates who absolutely wanted us to do it. We're still not sure about it at the end of that process. So we're not sure, but that kind of whose decision is it is all kind of rattling around the head. Some of this we've tried to write up for Disability in Society, and there's a piece we're just working through at the moment with Professor Val Williams about kind of how that might look with help from Hannah over in Lancaster. So because we think it's really important that people who would experience social work give us a view about whether they think this is a good thing or not, because we're not sure.
Just kind of touching on the Mental Capacity Act statutory principles and kind of how important they are to us as practitioners with regards to this piece of work. Having that conversation with people in the units and certainly with staff about principle number 1, about the assumption of capacity, was really, really important to us, that actually we weren't prepared, even though there is no mental capacity test for voting, that we weren't prepared to kind of accept that kind of blanket approach in terms of capacity, because it's illegal. So we're not going to have that conversation with you. We will assume capacity unless there's reasons to think otherwise, and then there's a process to go down. And then the second principle about taking every practicable step to enable somebody to make the decision became really, really powerful for us, and the social workers in this piece of work and other pieces of work as well that kind of sprung from this have gone to some kind of really extraordinary steps in order to demonstrate principle 2 in terms of, so one of the examples is, there's often a lot of pressure on older people in particular when they go into hospital about their discharge. The discharge is often quick and rapid because everybody's worried about people queuing up on trolleys. So there's lots of pressure from older people's wards about discharge. One of the quickest ways of discharging older people, in my experience, kind of 25 years in social work, one of the quickest ways of discharging older people from hospital wards is into a care home. You would think that would be one of the most complex pieces of work. Imagine going into hospital now, today, and finding out that actually you're never going to go back to your own home again, you're going to go somewhere else. So this should be a very complex piece of work with lots and lots of kind of relationships that need to be built up. Actually a very quick piece of work by the local authority and the NHS. So some of the ways that we've been trying to enable people there and to take every practical step to enable them to make the decision is kind of sitting alongside people and kind of really beginning to understand and showing videos and talking about this is, we had one social worker who with their phone went back to the person's home and was doing a video around this person's home. This person had got quite advanced dementia, but she only needed to demonstrate capacity, that specific moment in time, to understand what home was, to understand what a care home placement was. Couldn't do it, had no concept of it unless she was able to visually see what her home looked like, so she could recall what a bedroom looked like, what her own television set looked like, what her remote control. So the social worker went around videoing all these different artefacts in her room, and then showed her videos of this is care home settings, this is what, when the nurse is talking to you about we think you need to go into a care home, this is what it looks like, this is what your care home would look like, and then kind of able to make a decision. So that kind of principle 2 is really important. Principle 3 is really important as well, because principle 3 is about making unwise decisions. And just very quickly, because I know I'm going to be waffling on it. So principle 3 is really, really interesting, because on the day of the general election in 2015, we had one particular social worker she'd so bought this about how she wanted to support people to vote, and she was working in the a part of Calderdale that was quite politicised, the Upper Valley, kind of Hebden Bridge area. There's some quite highly politicised groups in that area. So actually she was really struggling to support somebody with a disability to vote. When she was phoning up people telling her where to go, and I don't need your help, thanks very much. She finally got, it was kind of, we were about 5:30, 6 o'clock, she phoned me up and she says, I've got somebody in the back of my car, basically. They're just about to get in the car now. I'm taking them to the ballot box, and she was so pleased. And I saw her later on that evening when we were kind of just rounding up the kind of work that we'd done, and she was really, really flat. She was really, really flat. And I said to her, what's wrong? And she said, I can't say the name of the party that this person voted for. But it was quite an extreme to where the social worker was. Anyway, so unwise decisions, people can make unwise decisions, unfortunately.
And on that bombshell, we're going to end today. And thank you very much for listening to us this afternoon. I hope we've entertained you. Thank you.